Hey everybody, this is Carlos. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, we're going to be speaking with Tony Panteleo of Florida Redtails and SenCal Exotics. Tony's a locality boa and python breeder who is also a fellow falconer. We're going to talk about how he got involved in the boa game and his plans for the upcoming season. Finally, he's going to give us some tips on breeding true redtails.
Boas Radio is on the air now!
Welcome everybody to Boa Rack Radio. I'm your host, Carlos Rojas of Morphs Unleashed. And I'm really excited about our guest today, Tony Panteleo of Florida Redtails and SenCal Exotics. Based out of California, Tony is well known for his work with pythons, but he's also a locality boa aficionado. Tony is also a fellow falconer. Tony, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no sweat, dude. So, brother, for those that may be unfamiliar from the boa side of the house, talk a little bit about, how you got involved in reptiles and then how eventually that kind of led you to boas.
Sure, yeah. So, as a kid, I didn't really have any concept of reptiles as pets. And we went into this local pet store, and the guy there, it was a pet store, but he had a heavy emphasis on reptiles, and he had at the time, everything was wild caught. So he had this little tiny wild caught Suriname boa, and he put this
cool
flighty, bitey little thing in my hands,
Yeah.
And I just fell in love. And so my first obsession was definitely redtail boas.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And this guy actually, so he was like, "Oh, if you like this, come back next week." And I came back to the shop next week. And this is the 90s, so he had an albino ball python, and my head exploded. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Oh yeah, dude, those were insane back in the day, man. What were they going for at that time? Between 5 to 10?
Yeah, I think it was about $7,500 a piece.
Woo.
Got it from Pete Call.
Okay.
And then he's like, "Oh, if you like this, come back next week." And I was like, "Oh my god, this guy!" And so I came back next week, and he had a pair of visual pieds also.
Holy shit, dude!
Yeah, this guy, his business didn't last long. I think he was spending all on these cool snakes from Pete, but but it got me hooked, And of course, my dad was deathly afraid of reptiles, so that was a no go. But I was just obsessed after that, and so most of us did, I started researching him to death, going to the library, getting every book I could, watching every show I could, and then I picked up field herping because it was the only way I could interact with reptiles and snakes. Right. Yeah, and so I kind of just for basically the next decade did a ton of field herping and just research and stuff, kind of photographing animals in the field, and until I was old enough to I was 17 and I wanted a snake, and so I did what, I'm not condoning this, no one should ever do this. I got a pair of ball pythons in my parents' house, and they found them, and they were like, "That's a no-go." So, as this was my priority,
where'd you have them stashed?
In the closet, with a raincoat.
I'm only laughing because I did the same thing, dude.
Yeah, so they found him eventually. But it was 8 months, dude, and
holy shit!
Yeah,
I think I lasted a month, man.
I was very diligent on my cleaning, and it stunk already in there, I'm sure. So, and so they were like, "No, you can't have this in the house." And so I was like, "All right, I got a few bucks," and I decided to move out. I was ready to go to college anyways, so I moved out so I could keep snakes.
That's awesome, dude. So
yeah.
So you end up moving out, and then when did you kind of start getting involved a little bit heavier with snakes? So you moved out. Did you pick up more ball pythons? Did you then kind of specializing anything? Kind of how did that play out?
I started immediately amassing my collection. So I got because now I didn't have the same restriction.
Right.
And so I was able to keep a larger snake. So I immediately got a Suriname.
Right.
A male Suriname. And then I did get some more ball pythons. And at that point, most people new into the hobby, I'm like a kid in a candy shop, and I just kind of amassed a hodgepodge of cool stuff.
Right.
I did get a call albino from Pete. When you did, remember the old, the self address mailing.
Yeah, totally, dude. Yeah, 100%, man.
So I ordered I ordered an albino from him that way.
Oh my god, dude. I sometimes I forget about those days, like how stressful it was. Like I always sent in for the price lists, you know what I mean? Whether it was to like Pete Call or to David Tracy over at VPI, right? And different people like that. But dude, I don't think I ever ordered during the price list days. Like I ended up, going to people's houses to pick stuff up, but I don't think I ever like actually had the balls to order.
And like I feel like I was the world's biggest tire kicker by that point because for a decade I've been ordering these price lists and never been able to order, so now it's finally the world had opened up.
Right, that's awesome, dude. So tell me about some things you're passionate about outside of boas and reptiles.
So still definitely field herping.
Yep.
I do quite a bit of that. I do falconry, like you said, and that's like my number one passion to be honest. But what comes with that too is I also love bird dogs, like running and training bird dogs.
Oh, nice,
Very
man.
amateur, but I definitely love it.
Yeah, no, actually, that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about too over here, man. I got a German short hair, and then I got a wire hair over here that I hunt pretty heavily. And my former apprentice, shout out to Nate Danford out there. He's a professional dog trainer, so I kind of pick his brain and consult with him every now and then. So yeah, man, I'm with you on that. What kind of dogs are you running right now?
I have a female Vizsla.
Oh, nice.
That I've been running. Yeah, she's a good dog. She's primarily been a falconry bird, a falconry dog, and then I just got an Irish setter out of Pennsylvania, and so I'm gonna hopefully kind of use him for both. But my main thing is to have him as a gun hunting dog and see how he does for falconry.
Yeah, dude, that's one of the things some people don't really appreciate. I think dogs can be very hit or miss despite, what titles their parents may have. And, it takes a lot of work to get them used to it, especially if you want to dual purpose a dog so that it can work, with both, the birds and with the guns. Because, I mean, I'm having that struggle right now too, man. So, like, I have one little wired hair. He is dumb as a rock, man, but in the field he is absolutely money. You know what I mean? Like he'll work with
little wire hairs of jet fuel.
Yeah, dude, he's dope, man. He he works really well with my goshawk, right? So I run a Butioides, and he's she's like a don't take any shit type of goss. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so her and the wire hair get along really well, and he's actually pretty solid little gun dog. But then we have that short hair, and that short hair is like 1,000 miles an hour, and like it seems like the only time he's a really good dog as far as hunting wise is when he's dead tired. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Does he overrun his nose a little bit in the beginning?
Oh yeah, dude, all the time. And the thing is, once he settles down, he's actually pretty solid, at least for gun hunting. But I can't have him work with the birds because he is super birdy, right? And like, there's been like 3 or 4 times where my goshawk, has bounded to his muzzle and just went for a ride with him, and he's just more excited that he's got a bird on him than anything else, man. He doesn't really care about the fact that he's got a hole in his muzzle because of it,
Yeah. Those are dogs. I feel like my Vizsla is like that too, where she has a ton of energy. Not necessarily like she's not as birdy towards the birds, but she has so much energy. It's like I feel like I have to run her before I run her so that she gets some of that initial energy out.
Right, man. Yeah. So yeah, dude. So you mostly like when you're training the bird dogs, are you doing just upland work? Are you doing some duck work? Are you comboing? Like, kind of, how's that working for you?
Yeah, to be honest, I've been using primarily upland work.
Yeah.
Just because we hunt a lot of quail and stuff.
Right.
And so 90% that, but I did use my Vizsla last season to flush ducks off of larger ponds for my peregrine.
Nice, man. That's awesome, dude. So let's kind of circle back over to the boa side of the house. So what kind of made you go from like a hobby collection into a breeding collection?
I mean, I feel like most people in the hobby, we just do everything all or nothing.
Right.
And so it just kind of grew and grew. And as I did it, I decided if I was going to keep, amassing this collection, I needed to focus a little bit.
Right.
And I still haven't fully nailed that part, but so I just decided that if I wanted to do it and I was going to spend my hard-earned dollars, I should do it in a way that it could at least pay for itself, and provide that for me as a kind of a business hobby.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. So was there any like specific moment where you're like, you know what, I think I'm ready to kind of take this into a business and do this more seriously, or did it just kind of evolve over time?
Yeah, I think that was kind of my mindset, but I started. I had a group of basically veiled chameleons,
Right.
and a group of panther chameleons, and they just made a ton of babies, and so I
Right.
was selling them to pet stores, and basically, like it added up, and I was like, well, this actually, panned out really well for me, and I decided I was like, I can take this and just spend it on something dumb that a young 20-year-old does, or I can take it and roll it over into better caging, investing in animals, and I kind of just did that and never stopped.
I think your story's kind of similar to how a lot of people do it. I think eventually people just slowly grow out their collections and they kind of get to this point of realization where they're like, I'm keeping a lot of this stuff that I'm producing back, or I'm wholesaling it, and I should probably kind of get a little bit of a focus. So, once you started kind of going into that breeding collection kind of thing, is that when you started to focus on locality boas, or did that kind of come later?
That came later. So at that point I was still keeping maybe 4 or 5 locality boas just as pets, and then when I rolled over that money, I was primarily rolling it over into ball pythons.
Right.
And that was, I think, 2000 and maybe 8 or 9.
Right.
And I bought my powerhouse killer bee male at the time. That was a powerhouse.
Oh yeah, totally.
And some het clown stuff, and I made possible het clowns, and so it was. I would say I rolled most of my investments over into just ball pythons.
Right.
And then that really, I did have some success with that, where I was able to, roll that over into more professional caging and other species that I was keeping.
Awesome, man.
And so I went next from there actually I started keeping, I did have my boa still and some odds and ends, but I kind of focused on ball pythons and reticulated pythons. So that was the majority of my collection for, the last maybe 8 years.
Yeah, and I think I originally became aware of you actually because you were keeping retics. So actually one of my buddies was like, oh yeah, dude, there's this other falconer in Central California. He's like a big retic guy, and they kind of referred me to you. But at the time I was playing with the idea of getting some more retics. I'm really good friends with Jay Brewer. So I've always, secretly wanted to keep some retics, and I have kept one in the past, but it was back in the days of the wild caught retic days. So I think that thing just ruined me, man, because that little bastard, and he was definitely not little. Every time we opened up the cage, he had the stereotypical retic feeding response, and I basically had to chuck a rabbit at him to keep from getting nailed myself. And mind you, in those days, I didn't scare too much because kind of like you, dude, I had a lot of locality boas, and my locality boas were all wild caughts, right? But at least with those, they were predictable, I was for sure understanding, if I opened up the cage, I could read their body language a little bit better. It just seems like every time I opened up the retic's cage, he just gave me the crazy eye. And basically for lack of better description, it's like having, a cribbo or an Eastern Indigo that's really, really hungry, and they could be sweet, but the moment they see you coming, they have that certain level of intelligence, and they're like, oh, all right.
Yeah,
I'm going to get you.
That's funny you say that. That's the exact analogy I use. I'm like, it reminds me of a huge athletic dry marcon. They're always watching you. They're observant, and they're kind of, if they're hungry, they come out of their spring loaded.
Oh, yeah, dude. 100%. 100%, man. So let me ask you, who were some of the people that kind of mentored you and inspired you when you were getting started kind of on the business side?
As far as I didn't think I had like a traditional single mentor, but I
Right.
had a lot of people that I looked up to and who were really good about answering, questions here and there when I had them, and people like Casey Lazick and
Oh yeah.
Eugene Bissett,
Yep.
Mike Eckert, Michael Beach. I really looked up to Brian Abramson, the founder of Florida Redtails. I really got up to him. He was a very nice guy.
Right.
And then Vin's books. I read and read and read Vin's books, and that was
Right.
like one of my, biggest learning sources of learning and knowledge. And then the rest, I think, was just kind of trial and error.
Yeah, no, totally, man. And one of the things, like, we've mentioned Vin's name a couple of times here on the podcast, dude. And I think he still does not get credit outside of the boa community, really, to his contributions to the overall reptile keeping game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he really pioneered a lot of work with locality stuff, but more importantly, he, through his books, brought a lot of people into the hobby and made people think deeper into their interest in boas itself. I think, like, prior to that, I'll be real, man. Prior to that, I think a lot of people saw boas as the cool kind of novelty snake that everybody should have one of, right? But it wasn't until Vin's books came out that people really started to take a hard look at them and specialize in them and really, really focus on them. So, no, man, I give that guy tons of credit too, man. So let's talk about a little bit about what you're doing currently, man. Talk a little bit about some of your primary project focuses. Let's start with boas, and then maybe we can get into pythons and other stuff.
Sure. Yeah, so for boas, I'm doing pretty much 100% locality stuff.
Yeah.
The only morph that I have is Parsons,
Okay.
which is a locality morph. It's a Guyana morph. So I am breeding. I have a male Parsons and 2 female Guyanas, and then I have a pair of North Brazilians who I believe it's looking good for this season.
Yeah.
The male is a Lemke Basset lineage, and then the female is a Dyer Lemke.
Yeah, and those Lemkes, they're pretty buckskin if I remember correct, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The female has that real buckskin color.
Nice.
And then the male has really, the kind of like the North Brazilians, that really dirty, speckled background.
Dude, those are some gorgeous boas, man. They're super underrated, dude. I think as more people begin seeing those, I think those will kind of pop up in popularity, because it seems like every time people mess with any sort of like short-tailed boas, it typically ends up being kind of on the Bolivian side of the house. But those are those North Brazilians are really, really badass, man.
Yeah, they're sweet, man. They're definitely becoming one of my favorites for sure. And then I do have some Surinoms.
Nice.
I have a female Florida Redtail line and a male that are from Brian that I'm pairing this year, and those are 2 of my favorite animals. And then he's also being paired with a Pokegron female.
Oof, that's gonna be smoking, dude.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, dude. And then any other locality stuff that you got? You got any Peruvians or any other stuff?
I have. So I have a male Palmaville Peruvian.
Right.
And then but he's still growing up. And then next year, I'll probably do a Pucallpa Peruvian breeding. I have a female that she's probably my favorite animal in my collection. She has like that typical golden Pucallpa color.
Right.
And then real funky aberrant saddles.
Mm.
And then I don't know if it's just a fluke or what, but I'm gonna at least try to breed for. She has an orange tail and a really black underside.
Really?
So everything besides her saddles is like black. Yeah.
So her belly's like black speckled. Is that kind of what you're describing?
So like this. So basically, her underside and the sides of her tail are all black, and then just her saddles are orange.
Whoa! Oh man,
I'll post up. Yeah, it's funky, man.
Yeah, dude, you got to send me a pic of that because that sounds really, really badass, man. I have the soft spot for Peruvians because I think, besides being one of the largest of the true redtails, right? Like they tend to have like a really mellow disposition if raised correctly, dude. And they like, they I hate to like, anthropomorphize, but like they almost like develop like a little personality to them. Like every Peruvian I've ever had or dealt with has always been, definitely like a really cool, gentle giant, which is awesome because as babies they just want to eat my freaking face,
Yeah, it's fun to. You're right, man. It's fun to watch that develop because they really come into their own, and each one's a unique specimen, definitely.
Yeah. Any other?
I'll post up.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll post up some pictures on my media too for everyone if they want to check it out, and we'll hopefully have a litter from her next year.
Oh, that'd be great, man. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the Python projects that you still have going on, and talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I still have a couple retic pairings I'm doing this year, and I'm doing some like marble mochino and marble purple sunfire pairings, and then next season I have a girl that I'm really excited about. She's a lavender jaguar motley sunfire.
Oh damn!
And my goal is to make some mochinos or some orange glows with her, and then I have a Rennick ghost tiger that will be ready next year too, and I'm really excited about that project.
No, that's an awesome project, man. Any other Python stuff that you think you're going to have going over the next year or the next couple of years?
Yeah, I still am doing some ball pythons. I am doing some clowns, some Orange Dream, Super Orange Dream clown projects.
Nice.
I have a few puzzle projects that I'm working on still. And then other than that, I would like to do a couple Desert Ghost pairings, make some Desert Ghost combos.
Awesome, dude. So tell me, what are some of the lessons that you've kind of brought in from field herping into the keeping side of the house?
Yeah, man. So I feel like the biggest way that field herping is carried over to my keeping was, I don't do it often, but I had collected a few specimens, and I was like, well, what's the best way to keep these? And so we brought out like infrared guns and observed the temperatures that they're basking at, and kind of their behaviors and their environment and their habitat. And we tried to emulate that in captivity so that they would have like the best, the best, closest natural environment that they could. And then I was like, well, that ought to be the mindset that I carry over into keeping other stuff. And so I kind of, certain species, I looked up really what is their natural environment,
right?
How are they living, where are they living, what are they eating, what's their, what's the terrain. And so I did my best to try to emulate that for some of the other species I was keeping that maybe there isn't as much husbandry information on.
Yeah, and do you think that's what's kind of helped you become successful with the true Redtails? Because, like, for a lot of people, they become really intimidated when thinking about picking up true Redtails simply because they are perceived as being very difficult to breed, right? And very difficult to really keep thriving. But the reality is, like you're saying, I think a lot of that simply comes down to lack of information about keeping them. So do you think that's played a factor into the way that you end up keeping your Redtails and your success with true Redtails?
Definitely. I think that it's a kind of a combination of emulating their natural environment, whether that's, nighttime drops, low pressure system, breeding around low pressure systems, stuff like that. And then also I feel like it's being fairly diligent about keeping like tight parameters on your husbandry.
Right.
It's a little more particular than a lot of the other species I've kept, where they'll thrive, but they may not necessarily breed or reproduce.
Right. No, totally, man. So one of the things that I think we wanted to cover real quick is obviously a lot of people know you for your work with pythons and with Sencal Exotics, but you recently acquired Florida Redtails from Kevin South. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. So I know that, there's kind of a storied history with Florida Redtails, but it's always been, my favorite line of my favorite animals. And I was working with Kevin, who's not too far from me, so I was able to pick up quite a few animals from him locally, and I picked up more and more locality stuff, and it kind of got to the point where I think that maybe he was looking to go a different direction, and I had picked up most of his stuff anyway, so it made sense where we were able to work out a deal, and I acquired Florida Redtails from him.
Okay.
And so
Is he involved in the business anymore, or it's just you now? Are you the sole proprietor of Florida Redtails now?
Yeah, yeah. So Kevin's no longer involved in the business, and
Got it.
now so all the social media, all the ordering and everything was going to go directly through me.
Awesome. Awesome, man. And then how is this going to interact with Sencal Exotics? Are you thinking of merging them, or are you going to keep them kind of like two independent companies?
I think at this point, just because Florida Redtails has such an established name in boas,
Right.
um, I think that I would maintain that. And SunCal Exotics, it's primarily how I've established my boas. I mean, my pythons and some of my other stuff. And so
Right.
I think I may try to run them simultaneously,
Okay.
especially because if I'm producing a lot of pythons, it's kind of doesn't make sense for me to release them under this boa
Oh,
company
totally.
whose
Totally.
name
Yeah.
is so it was kind of a tough call, and that was definitely one of the key things I had to think about when I was like, well, do I acquire this? How am I going to structure sales? And I think that for now it's best that I keep them separate, and I want to make sure Florida Red Tails lives on and produces some cool locality boas.
Awesome, man. Yeah, and I think kind of what you're describing is something that does happen a lot of times, right? Like I myself have picked up other people's collections in the past, right? That especially people that are getting out of the hobby, and that's always been a tough decision whether or not you want to continue under their existing name or you want to establish a new name or you want to place it under your existing name, right? So no, it's definitely interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on that. So along that line, kind of give us some important lessons that you've learned setting up your reptile business.
I would say focus. I mean, I know, I'm sure everyone's probably driven this home, and I'm a bit of a hypocrite for saying it, but just find what you love is the key thing, and not what's hot. Don't chase the dragon. Find what's hot and
Right.
invest in that, and make smart fiscal decisions would be my biggest ones, because at the end of the day, even if you get these top dollar animals and you're producing babies, you still have to invest a ton of your time and energy into cleaning cages, and you want to love doing that. You want to love opening up those cages and checking on them, and if you don't
Definitely.
love what you're doing, it quickly comes work.
Yeah. No, absolutely, dude. I think that's a really good set of advice, man. Now, obviously, one of the things that I firmly believe is that as more people get more experience working with locality boas, especially true redtails, they're going to end up, increasing their popularity even further in the hobby, right? Because it seems right now, true redtails and locality boas in general are kind of like a boa nerd thing, right? We have like our own little sub community within the world of boas, and we end up, a lot of times diving full into our little kind of specialty, right? And
Yeah.
I think as people get more comfortable with working with true redtails, because admit it, everybody loves boas because of their bright red tail, right? And the main reason
Oh
people
yeah.
love boas, okay, is because they've usually seen a picture of a true red tail versus the common boa that most of us keep, right? So what do you see as part of the future of the hobby, especially associated with locality boas?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you there. As far as I think that locality boas for a long time were kind of a niche boa nerd, uh, like hobby or business. And
Right.
I've noticed more and more in the last season or two that I'm getting a lot more inquiries from people who are just reptile keepers,
Right.
hobbyists. They have a few snakes, and they just want true red tail boas. Whereas before that, a lot of the inquiries are getting, were from my friends or other breeders and
Yeah.
people who just were exclusively locality keepers. And I think like a lot of that is, I'm not going to bash ball pythons. I think a lot of that came from people see these crazy ball python combos, and it brings them into the hobby, and that's where they start. But it really piques their interest, and as they do research, they find all these other animals. And I think that ball pythons and the different morphs and stuff have brought in a lot of people to the hobby, and I think they're just coming in now, and I think that's the future. I think that those people who are new keepers are going to start expanding to other species.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I think, at the end of the day, there's always going to be a significant population that's going to fall into that niche category still, I mean, people want to see the best example of something that they could potentially see out in the wild, right? And I think there's nothing wrong with mixing, localities with morphs to make colors. Whatever, makes you happy, let it make you happy. But that being said, man, there's something that's just beautiful about a pure locality true redtail, right? When you're just seeing something that is a ideal example of a wild animal, okay? There's like a sense of cleanliness associated with it. I don't know, man. It's hard to describe, but you see something and you're like, yeah, this is something that I could potentially go out and see in the wild and appreciate,
Totally. Yeah, I think that's like not a misconception, but a lot of newer people into like locality boas, they are kind of confused coming from like the morph world. They're confused as to like why there's such a price, like there's so much variability in price for locality boas. And it's just because like behind the scenes, what went into that was decades of like dedicated people that were trying to make the best example of,
damn right,
a natural looking boa.
Yeah, dude, and I think you hit it right on the head, man, because especially when we have people coming over that are brand new to the hobby or people that are coming over from other parts of the hobby, right? I think the hardest pill for them to swallow is, one, why would we pay X amount of dollars more for a quote-unquote normal? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Because they're like, because I've got
cheaper over here, and I'm like, that's that's fine. Like if you're looking for a pet, more power to you.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people put in a lot of effort, and then on the flip side, you get people who are like happy to pay what you ask because they know what went into that animal.
Absolutely. And they understand the value of lines and line breedings. I think one thing that is shared by most advanced boa keepers in general, whether they're locality guys or not, is the fact that we appreciate lines, right?
Yeah.
We appreciate, for lack of a better word for those people who aren't familiar with the term lines, we appreciate pedigrees, right? So, for example, whether you're looking at a morph, right, you want a specific line of pastel, let's say. Let's say you really want a pastel that maintains its coloration throughout its line, that you're like, oh, man, I really want an RC pastel, for example, right? And you're willing to pay more for that RC pastel than you would for a generic, pastel boa, right? And it's the same thing when you are looking, at locality boas. You're willing to pay more, for example, for like a real Bravo boa than you would be for, your random wild cots. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's really good point that you brought up, man. So we're going to take a quick break right now, and then when we come back, we're going to kind of talk about our passion for falconry, brother. All right?
Sounds great.
All right, guys, we're back. So for those of you that know me or know about me, one of the things that you'll know is the fact that I'm really passionate about falconry. Now, much like the boa hobby, falconry tends to attract individuals from all walks of life. And this pursuit is, at times all-consuming, and it quickly becomes more than a lifestyle than just a hobby. So as a falconer, I spent the last decade, becoming a hunting partner with my bird of prey. There's a lot of misconception that we own birds of prey, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Hell, if anything, the birds of prey own us, So one thing to keep in mind is that partnership is developed through a lot of hard work, okay, through a lot of socialization and a lot of creation of mutual trust. And Tony, on the other hand, has taken this even further. He's actually made a business out of falconry. So Tony, let's kind of start off at the beginning. What are you flying right now, bro?
Yeah, so I have a couple birds. I have a male Harris hawk that I am flying from the Coulsons, who are breeders, out of Louisiana. And they've done a good job selectively breeding these Harris hawks. So he's kind of my workhorse that I use for work.
Right.
And then last season I flew a female, an autumn peregrine falcon, and I primarily hunted ducks and crows with her.
Nice, man. Nice, dude. So one of the things that you kind of just mentioned is the fact that you said that you flew it for work. So talk a little bit about how you've been able to transition your love of falconry into a career.
Sure, man. Yeah, so I do traditional falconry, which as you know, but for everyone listening, is hunting with a trained bird of prey. But I also do something called abatement falconry or abatement, which is kind of glorified pest control. And so what we do is we use birds of prey to haze pest species. So it takes a lot of different forms. So that could be falconers using falcons to scare pest birds away from crops. It could be used for pigeon control in urban areas and crow control and seagulls in landfills. But the bulk of what I'm doing is I'm using a male hair's hawk to basically scare off. We have crows that we live in like an agricultural area, and so
Right.
they'll go out during the day and they'll eat in the crops, and then at night they'll flood into like the urban areas because it's quiet and warm and safe for them. And we're using birds of prey to kind of move them and haze them. So we basically just persistently teach them, hey, a predator lives in this area. It's not a safe area for you to roost. And so they're roosting on top of businesses, over cars, and there's just a huge mess with the excrement.
Yeah, they're just crapping everywhere.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So we're using these birds to try to push them out of the area for the cities, and get an amicable solution where the crows can coexist, but they're not causing such havoc on the towns.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And let me ask you, when you started shifting over there from, the traditional falconry like I practice into the abatement falconry, did that change your lifestyle? Was it pretty much in line with what you were doing previously, except now you're getting paid for it and doing maybe more of it? Like, on the real, like, what was that like?
So yeah, I mean, this actually, I never had any sort of aspiration to do abatement falconry because I was like, oh, I have a day job and I have a collection of snakes, and and I hunt my birds, and so my schedule looked pretty full. But someone approached me about doing it in the Central Valley of California where we're at, and he's like, hey, we have this problem. I have this is the job, this is the opportunity, and he kind of laid out like the salary and the hours, and I was like, well, you know what, that fits perfectly with my day job and everything else.
Right.
So it kind of aligned.
Wow.
And so I had zero aspirations, but it just kind of came through organically.
Nice, man. And are you currently working under somebody else's contract, under your own? Like,
Yeah, so I'm basically a subcontractor.
got it.
And so you have to have a special federal permit to do all the abatement stuff, to have your own abatement license, and you have to be a falconer for you have to be a master falconer, and there's a lot of rigors that go around it that I'm not necessarily interested in at the moment.
Right.
But I still want to continue, to work and get the experience in the field. So I'm just working as a subcontractor for a couple different abatement under a couple different licenses.
Nice, man. So talk a little bit about what your journey into falconry was like, because obviously it's a little different for everybody who's involved in the sport, right? But kind of give us a rundown of how you got interested in it, and then what eventually led you down the path, and maybe what that path looked like.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think there's two pretty common ways that people come into falconry, and that's they're interested in the birds, and they learn about the sport through that, and then they take up hunting.
Yep.
Or I think the other way is that you're already a hunter previously, and you learn that this is a viable option.
Right.
And then the latter is kind of how I came to it. I grew up
same.
upland hunting. Yeah. So I was an upland hunter, and I learned and I already loved exotic animals. And so when I learned about falconry, I was like, well, you're telling me I can hunt upland birds or with a bird of prey over bird dogs. And it was just, the second I found out about it, again, like the snakes, I was super into it, but my parents, they were supportive, but it never really panned out. And we went, I think when I was like 16 or 17, we went to Ireland, and we did this like hawk walk thing where
Oh yeah.
it
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't hunting, you know. It was like, but it was a cool experience to have that bird land on your glove. Um, and then after that, like I kind of was going off to college, and so I kept researching it. I went to meets and I met people, and like it was an end game goal for me. And so eventually, once I graduated college and I bought a house, I had researched to death, and I just jumped in.
Right. Right, man. That's awesome. And let me ask you, dude, for those who are interested in becoming falconers, kind of lay out what the process is.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would start by just kind of doing some research and realizing it is a hunting sport. And,
Yeah.
Thank
you for saying that, dude, because one of the things that I think we constantly joke about is the people that come into falconry thinking it's going to be pet keeping because they want to walk around looking cool with a freaking hawk on your fist or a falcon on your fist, right? And these are the same, like, morons, for lack of better terms, that will walk around with, a 7-foot boa in the middle of a mall scaring the shit out of people, causing a negative impact, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, if you guys want to be falconers like Tony and I, you gotta hunt. Sorry, there is no other way. The birds need to hunt for their mental well-being. It's just that simple.
Absolutely. I think that's I'm glad you said that too. I think it's an important distinction that a lot of people, we get a ton of inquiries of people who are interested, and when they realize it's not just having a cool pet, a lot of that diminishes. And I start out right up front, like, hey, it's a hunting sport. Are you still interested? It's not just a pet. And I think that's important because it's not fair in my eyes to have this bird and not give it that, I guess, enrichment or interaction or that innate drive to get out and fly and hunt at least, regularly, whatever that is for you. I try to do it at least every day,
Yeah, no, same here. We, during the season, I'm out every day, and even in the off season, I think we're, goofing with my birds a little bit and giving them some sort of enrichment activity at least, every 3 days just to keep them sane during the molt.
Yeah, so I think that's the main thing. And once you kind of realize, that's what the sport is, I think the best thing you could do if you're interested in getting into it is reaching out to like your local clubs or wherever that is, and seeing when a meet is, and going to those meet and networking and meeting other falconers. If you tell them you're new and you're interested in the sport, a lot of times you're going to meet people who are willing to take you out and let you see what it is firsthand and ask questions and learn from. And that's what I did. And those networks are important because once you've done that and you've decided this is something you're interested in pursuing full force because it is such an all-encompassing lifestyle, I think that, then you're going to go and you're going to take an exam from the Department of Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game. And then you're going to have to acquire a sponsor. And so that sponsor is going to help you build your facilities. We call them mews. It's basically the house for your bird where you house them. And then once you build your mews, a game warden is going to come out and inspect that. So, this process isn't something you can decide on a whim to do. I think for me in California, it took me like 4 or 5 months before I was, even like approved as a falconer. And then you're an apprentice for 2 years. And then
we should say a minimum of 2 years because there is
minimum 2 years.
There is no guarantee that you're going to leave apprenticeship unless you're recommended to be promoted. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Thank you. Yeah, and then so you do that for 2 years, and generally depends where you're at, but most places you're flying a redtail or a kestrel falcon. Some other areas allow other birds, but you're doing all this under the tutelage of a sponsor, and so it's something that you got to be serious about. And I think, like you said, it's kind of a lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it totally is, man. And then one of the things that we do notice is a lot of people within the falconry community are also reptile keepers. I mean, there's guys like my former apprentice who is now a general, Nate Danford. He was a blackhead python keeper, and then also kept some sharp boa stuff. And then I think he also keep some other Australian species. And then obviously we got other guys like Tyler Sladen, who's a big retic guy, And, it seems that there's kind of a shared passion
Chase
there.
Dellis, too.
Oh, yeah, Chase, of course, man. His parents are some of the most famous, reptile people in the entire industry. And then Chase is one of the best eagle falconers in the nation,
Yeah.
So, totally, man. So, one of the things that, is similar between these two pursuits is that it requires, as you were saying, kind of that mentality of learning everything possible about a subject and really diving deep into it, right? The other thing that it requires is a understanding that at the end of the day, the welfare of your animals is above your welfare a lot of times, right? Which means like the days that you don't feel like going out and hunting, too damn bad. The bird's got to hunt. The bird's got to eat. You know what I mean? The bird needs to fly around. The bird needs to stay healthy in that manner. So basically, what are some parallels between, falconry and kind of the boa industry that you've learned now that you've been involved in both of them for a while?
I think parallels is, obviously is like the attention to detail as far as husbandry goes. I feel like I learned a ton from falconry and carried that over to my keeping to a degree, in the sense that like not only husbandry but attention to detail and like the meticulousness it requires to do falconry. It taught me a different caliber of care, and that carried over to my snake keeping as far as and I think that is one of the things that helped me with locality boas is like,
oh, totally, dude.
You have to be so much more particular about your husbandry, and you have to be fastidious, and like the weight management of a micro falcon, making sure their weight is always right, is something that taught me a caliber of meticulousness that I couldn't even fathom, and that helped me in all facets of life, I guess.
Yeah, no, man, I'm with you on that, dude. Because honestly, for those that don't know what we're talking about, basically, in order for a bird of prey to successfully fly against game in an aggressive manner and have a really good shot at catching them, it has to be at a certain weight. If it's too light, then it's not going to have the strength to be able to effectively pursue and catch that game. If it's too heavy, it's going to be too fat to want to hunt. You know what I mean? So you have to find this like happy median where the animal's really, at its peak condition. The way that I liken it, so I spent a lot of time in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA community. It's like getting a fighter ready for a fight, They have to be at the right weight where they're going to be strong enough to be able to fight to the best of their abilities, okay? But light enough that they're not going to miss weight,
Absolutely, yeah. You're keeping them at, that peak performance condition.
Yeah, no, man.
Like an athlete. Absolutely, I like that analogy.
Yeah, dude. So I think obviously those are some great parallels that you kind of brought up, man. So let's kind of now shift into talking about, true redtails. Now, obviously there's this misconception. Well, I wouldn't even say it's a misconception. There's this perception, right, that locality boas are significantly more difficult to keep than other boas, right? And I don't think it's necessarily that they're more difficult to keep, but they're more difficult to get them to thrive, I think is a more fair way of putting it, right? And what I mean by thrive is being able to get them in a position where they're going to be not only healthy, okay, but healthy enough to want to breed and produce offspring. Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and the fact that, you really need to be super on top of your husbandry to really be successful within the locality boa stuff. So let's kind of start at the beginning. What are some of the locality boas that you're working with? Kind of give us a quick description of the ones that you're working with, and even particular lines and the reason that you enjoy those lines.
Sure, yeah. So I'll start with the Peruvians. I have Pucallpa Peruvians, and they're kind of known for having a golden coloration,
right,
and more of like a black aberrant saddles, and kind of longer tails. And like you said, they tend to be some of the biggest true Redtails. So the female I have is like I think she's 9 feet maybe. So that's definitely the biggest girl I have as far as
that's a large girl.
Yeah, and so they get a little bigger. And I do have the other line of Peruvians I have. So this is Pucallpa is a locality or point of export. The other male I have is I say it's a Palmaville, and that is a line bred by Jim Palmaville, and he makes these fantastic Peruvian boas that are very clean and gold, but they have like tiny little bow tie saddles.
Huh.
And they're just spectacular, man. They're just very clean. To me, it's like the pinnacle of Peruvian boas.
Right.
And then I have the North Brazilians I was talking about previously. They're kind of that buckskin color, and they have a really dirty, speckled background. And they have kind of thinner saddles,
right.
Kind of like almost like a bat symbol. I kind of liken it to.
Yeah, it totally does look like that. That's good.
And then and then I have, like I said, I have my trio of Guyanas, and those are pretty similar to Surinames, with some variability within them, but they are kind of line bred for more like a maroonish or purple color.
Right. Yeah.
And then I have the male I have is a Parsons I was talking about, and it's still Guyana, but it's a true Redtail morph, and it's kind of like I call it like a genetic ladder tail. It's
right.
got like blocky saddles; they're all connected, and then it's got a square blocky tail.
Right.
And that's an incomplete dominant, so it's got a super form, but we're working on those. We're still a ways out. And then we've got the Surinames, which are still my favorite to this day. I have quite a few different lines, but those guys tend to have kind of more like a tan or gray background.
Right.
With and I've seen a ton of variability with them, but at least the line bred animals tend to have more of what are called like peaked saddles, and people selectively breed them so that the saddle along their back, they come up and they form like points on the top and bottom of each saddle.
Right. Yeah, and that's pretty similar to like the Windows Peak line of VPI boas.
Yeah,
for those that maybe have seen those. Yep.
Yeah. And then obviously people breed them to try to make, the longest, prettiest red tail.
Yep.
And so I have a couple different localities I have a couple different lines of those. And it's pretty stark, like the difference in appearance. So I have my the two main Florida Redtail breeders I have are really like kind of like this golden color with like caramel colored saddles, and they're very aberrant, but they have like this long, beautiful red tail. Whereas my Pokegrown female, she's got a little bit less clean background, and it's like a gray, like a true gray, and she's got like very dark black, high contrast saddles, and she's got a very red tail, but it's a little bit shorter than the Florida Redtail. So that kind of gives you an idea of like the variability between lineage and how people have selectively bred for whatever trait that is desirable to them. So
right.
So Brian Abramson bred these caramel colored Surinames, but a lot of the other guys are breeding for like this really high contrast gray background color. Got it.
So let's go through a couple of those and maybe talk a little bit about what the temperament is like, and maybe even talk about, once we've kind of covered them, maybe which one you would recommend to somebody that's interested in getting into true Redtails, and you feel like is which particular group is going to be more of a better fit for a newer keeper that is maybe experienced with boas but has never had a true Redtail. So,
sure.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about. We'll start with the smaller guys. So let's talk about the short-tail boas, right? So most of these short-tail boas obviously are kind of from Brazil and Bolivia. So talk a little bit about your work with short-tail boas with Amaralis.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually, I'm actually fairly new to the BCI or the Amaralis. And I have a female, obviously, that you sent me, who's an awesome looking female.
Yep.
And then I have a male who I'm growing up, who is a Miller line from Barry
Ooh,
Miller.
nice, nice.
Yeah, and he's a sweet boy. We were talking about those thin saddles. He's got
Right.
like very, very thin Batman saddles and just like a very gray speckled background color. And to me, they're smaller snakes. They're kind of
Right.
stout, but I love their personality. They're super alert, super attentive. Um, I don't know. And I think they're beautiful too. They're pretty unique looking as far as like locality bows go.
Yeah, no, they got a really cool, silver
Mm-hmm.
kind of base color, and then with a little bit of a shorter red tail, right? The
Yeah.
reason they call them short tail boas. But you're right, man. They, I would say size wise, they tend to stay kind of at that 5 to 6 feet mark on average, right?
Yeah.
And they tend to be a little bit of a chunkier snake in general,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They're not fat like something that we would consider like fat from like a ball python type fat.
Sure.
They still maintain that square body type, which is nice to
Yeah.
see in any boa species. But they definitely muscle up, really nicely. Like as a
They're
matter
more
of fact,
short and stout like a python. You're right, but they do maintain that square muscle tone of a boa constrictor.
yeah, I mean they look buff, dude. I mean, like to the point that like
They
my
do.
son when he was little, he used to call one of them Wolverine, one of the Bolivians that I had, because it was short, stout, and just pure muscles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep. So talk a little bit about maybe your Brazilians.
Sure. Yeah. The Brazilians, they are less common, I would say, in captivity, but they are. I think they're going to gain in a popularity quite a bit. They stay pretty small, like a reasonable size,
Right.
and they just have a really like mellow, even disposition that makes them pleasant. That combined with their size makes them pleasant to be kept as like a pet for people who aren't looking to necessarily have a large collection.
Yeah.
And they're the same subspecies as the the Surinames and the Guyanas. They're
Right.
boa constrictor. But it's a good juxtaposition to look at those and like next those North Brazilians next to a Suriname because
Right.
but they've been bred for a different look. So
Right.
these Surinames are really clean, beautiful animals, and then you have on the other side these North Brazilians who are just selectively bred to just be covered in these black speckling, and
Right.
it's a pretty stark contrast between
They're
the
like
two.
a nice dirty boa, man. For lack of a better
Exactly.
term,
Yeah.
I'm a fan of busy patterns, dude. So no, I'm
For
with you
sure.
on that. And then so kind of moving up through South America, I guess, for lack of a better term, right? Now we're looking at. Let's kind of get into our Surinames and Guyanas.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's I won't get into the debate and the differences of those per se as far as origin, just because animals are exported from different areas, but they are the same subspecies. But whether you want to say they're the same or different, and boa nerds will debate it back and forth all day.
Right.
I think that it can be agreed upon that in captivity they've become a different locality they've been line bred to be totally different appearance. So the Guyanas
Right.
tend to have those chunkier saddles and more of like a purple maroon color.
Yeah, definitely a rich purple color, man. And I think that was true even before a lot of the line breeding. I remember having Guyanas back in like late 90s, early 2000s when they were being imported, and I just remember super purple animals coming out of there.
Yeah, they were beautiful. I remember seeing my first one. Like it was the Redtail that I love, but it was such a stark contrast of like purples and maroons all throughout. They're beautiful animals for sure.
And then personality wise, how do you find them?
Personality wise, I would find them similar to each other, and I would say it's kind of it depends on the animal again, and I think that it's important as a breeder. I like to socialize all my animals and keep
Right.
produce few enough animals that I can do that, because boas, as babies, they tend to be a little bit more defensive as other species.
Right.
but they calm down. At least I found that for the locality stuff. But they calm down, tremendously well with regular interaction.
Right.
And so as far as the adults, I think that they again are pretty inquisitive, fairly athletic snakes. They'll climb if you give them an opportunity to do so. I think that with good socialization, they can be just very tame animals. I've used my female pokegron and my big pucallpa for educational outreach programs for kids and stuff, and they tend to be, it's kind of a weird, for lack of a better word, they tend to be a little more squeezy when you have them out.
Right.
And so,
dude, that's actually a really good description. Huh.
Yeah, and that coupled with the fact that they can be a little bit bigger.
Yep.
They're good. They're a decent snake for someone who has experience with, bigger or medium-sized snakes. But for that reason, I'd say, you got to be physically capable of handling a bigger snake who will kind of hold on to you.
Yeah, no, and I definitely think they have like a little bit more of a strength level. And it's slightly different to maybe some people that have had some experience with some retics. Because a retic, when you take it out, especially a larger retic, always seems like they have somewhere they want to go or somewhere they want to explore, right? Whereas these ones are more than content to kind of slowly hang on to you.
Yeah.
But when you're, like you're saying, when they hang on to you, they hang on to you fairly firm. They like feeling that they are secure.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. It's a security thing. They want to feel that they are, safe. They're not going to fall, and you're making a good tree branch if they're doing that.
Right. All right, man. Let's move over now to our Peruvians, dude. So talk a little bit about Peruvians, kind of their temperament, and kind of some of the lines that you're working with, and why you picked those lines.
Yeah, sure. So the Peruvians. There's the main two locales are Iquitos and Pucallpa.
Yep.
Both neat animals. The Iquitos, I feel like both of them tend to have more of that kind of that golden background color, but I see a lot more in the Iquitos, kind of a uniform saddle.
Right.
And it stays pretty thin. It tends to look like a bow tie where it'll either be straight or kind of come to a narrow point in the middle.
Yep.
And the Pucallpas, I've seen a variation of Pucallpas, but a lot of the ones I've seen, or at least the ones I like and selectively breed for, is they kind of have that same golden color, but it's a really aberrant saddle pattern. A lot of times, like connecting saddles, and so it's definitely a different look. And then so those are the two main localities. And then there are a couple people, like I said, breeding them selectively. The main one, again, like I was talking about, would be Jim Palmaville, who produces some pretty outstanding animals. And those are again the gold color with the very, very thin saddles and a pretty long red tail. Yeah, and they get all of them get pretty large. Yeah, that's definitely the largest species of true red tail that I keep.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And talk a little bit about what it takes to kind of breed all these and, maybe some differences between breeding them and breeding, common boas.
Sure. So I definitely found a more kind of narrow parameter for the husbandry. But another thing that, for me, that was pretty big difference was true red tails tend to have a little bit more sensitive of a digestive system. And so, that's one of the things that people say, they're harder to keep. So if you have a true red tail, I tend to not try to feed them too large of a meal.
Right.
And so this is probably the only thing for me where I'm like, okay, they may be slightly more challenging to keep. And so if you feed a true red tail too big of a meal, and for whatever reason, a lot of times they'll regurgitate.
Yep.
Or they're more prone to that as opposed to a BCI. And so I always suggest to people, you got to be more diligent about the size of the meals you feed them. And if you do that, then I think you're going to have success if you've had success with, BCIs or breeding morph boas or keeping them. Yeah.
No, totally, man. And then I think one other tip that maybe I'd throw out there too that worked really well for me back when I did a lot of the BCCs, is the fact that I would kind of build in like a 3-month period where I would either not offer food or offer very little food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And I would do that as a preparatory for breeding season, right? And I found that ended up producing really healthy animals. And also, I just didn't feed as frequently as other people. I saw a lot of people who would feed weekly, their animals weekly. Whereas I would feed, when they're little, maybe once every 2 weeks. And then as they became adults, maybe once a month, right? And my Boas did really, really well. And they thrived under those conditions. And they bred under those conditions. Any other tips that you would kind of provide people as far as breeding BCCs goes?
I think you kind of that was a very good point. The other thing too is I find temp drops to be very effective for me. So I'll use thermostats with automatic temperature drops, and so as I'm bringing those temperatures down, I'm starting to decrease the feeding so that they don't have as much food sitting in their system with the cooler temperatures.
Right.
And then as I bring that up, this again for me, it works for me. It may not work for everyone, but I really like to utilize low pressure systems.
Really?
And humidity. Yeah, so I do that with my pythons too. But when you get low pressure systems, rain or thunderstorms, I'll pair everyone who's ready up, and I'll see a significantly higher percentage of locks during those windows.
Wow, that's actually really smart. I've heard about folks doing that, but I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that actually, planned for that in that manner. So,
sure.
No, dude, it's smart. It makes sense, man. So let me ask you, out of all the locality boas, which ones would you recommend for people who are experienced with boas but are looking to maybe pick up their first pair of localities?
If you're experienced with boas and you're looking to pick up your first locality, I would recommend looking at the boas, all the different localities, and getting what you like and doing diligent research.
That's awesome.
And you know what I mean? Like, as long as you're willing to put in the work and do the research, get what you like. Yep. Now, as far as people who maybe haven't had experience with boas,
let's say somebody coming over from the ball python world.
Yeah, I think that BCAs, the umbrellas, are a really good segue between boas and ball pythons, especially locality boas, because they kind of have a similar build. They stay smaller. They're fairly forgiving as far as care, but you got to be, just like any animal, you got to do your research and be diligent. But I think that's a good segue into locality boas.
Awesome, man. Well, brother, I appreciate you kind of covering these for us. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to do the Dirty Dozen.
The Dirty Dozen.
All right, guys, we're back. It's time for the Dirty Dozen. Tony, I'm going to ask you 12 questions. You give me 12 answers. They can be as long or as short as you want. All right, brother?
All right, fire away.
All right, man. Number one, what's the size of your current collection?
So the size of my collection is actually significantly down, but I'm keeping larger animals.
Right.
So a couple years ago, I was up at, maybe a couple hundred animals, and I decided to refocus a little bit, and now I'm sitting at about 75 breeders. So
nice.
That's excluding babies.
Yep.
So that's a wildly variable number.
Yeah, no, totally. Number two, husbandry-related question. Are you a frozen and thawed or live guy, and what's your bedding choice?
Okay, so I actually am going to be a contrarian. I do a lot of pre-killed feeders, just because I have the availability of wholesale live rodents locally, but I don't like feeding live.
Yep.
And so I opt to go with a pre-killed route, and I do supplement with frozen thawed for the boas. And then the only ones I feed regularly off frozen is all my retics have frozen rabbits and guinea pigs.
Right. Nice, man. And then as far as bedding.
Yeah. So bedding, I actually do mostly paper or like Reptizorb in my racks.
Yep.
And then if I'm finding that, I'd supplement with a humidifier, but if I'm finding I need more humidity or for my females who are getting close to laying, I like to put cocoa in there as a bedding.
Nice, man. Number 3, what's your favorite morph or locality?
Oh man, my favorite locality, even though I love all of them, runner up is the North Brazilians, but Surinam's always been my favorite since the first one.
Any particular
And then,
line that
as
you
far as
like?
lines? Yeah, I love the Florida Redtails. I do. Those are
Boom. There it is,
probably
folks.
my favorite. And then morphs, I love the Super Parsons, or I think that they've been dubbed as a candy cane,
Yep.
which I'm not a fan of, so I'll call them the Super Parsons.
Yeah, those are badass, man.
But they're sweet. And then I do, I'm not, like I said, a big morph guy with the boas, but I'm really loving like the carbon stuff that's been coming out recently.
Oh, yeah, totally, man. Shout out to Kenny Saito over there. That carbon project, I think, is one of the key projects in the entire future of the hobby. So big shouts out
I think it's got a
to him and
huge
everybody
potential.
working on him. Yeah, huge potential on that stuff. All right, man. Number 4, what is the most overrated morph or locality?
Oh man, I don't like this question. I'll tell you why a little bit. I don't like this question. So I feel like I'm gonna bring in a little bit of rechick and ball python guys here, but I feel like people like Justin Kabelka
Right.
And Ben Rennick, they've done a really good job, or did a really good job of finding these morphs. They kind of like came out and they just went to the wayside,
Right.
and they had a vision, and like, okay, what would this pair well with? And they took like things like spot nose, and even
Yep.
clown was like losing in popularity, and they made
Spot
these
nose,
screaming
leopard. Yep.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so they took it and had a vision, and just made animals that just brought these projects back to life. That being said, I think maybe some of the things, like I would say hypo, I think if I had to pick one, is just something that's not overrated but overused for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And things
Yep.
that I have a hard time picking as far as expression would be like something like Jaguar and Harlequin, that I have a hard time identifying, and maybe I don't see as much potential in.
Nice, man. All right. Number 5, what is the most underrated morph or locality?
Oh man, underrated, honestly. And I know it's somewhat popular. It's been around for a long time, but I think that leopard doesn't get enough credit where credit's due, in my opinion.
Yep.
And again, I think that I think that it's got a lot of potential as far as someone having a vision and bringing it back to life. Like, I think just recently, someone, in my opinion, did that, and they made that habanero boa, which I
Yep.
think was a hypo.
Yeah, it's
VPI Sunglow leopard.
It's
right?
a VPI Sunglow leopard. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
No,
and
that
that thing
thing's-
is that's beautiful.
Yeah, that thing is a screamer, dude. And then you know what? I'll throw one in here, dude, that I think is super underrated that you touched on, and that's Bolivian boas. Those Bolivians,
Yeah.
I think they are one of those snakes that a lot of people maybe overlook, but as more people get comfortable with it, I think you're going to start seeing people fall in love with that particular, locality, and then people are really going to start diving even deeper into trying to refine it.
Totally, man. Yeah, I think that you're right. They don't get enough credit because they have that shorter tail, and everyone wants the big, long red tail. But they're exemplary animals. They're very good to work with.
All right, man. Number 6. What's your favorite part of the hobby?
My favorite part of the hobby, number 1, it's going to be working with the animals, and 2, I think that I'm going to cheat and do 2. Sorry. And then the community and the friends I've made through the hobby. Whether that be shows, local or people you meet online.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much my favorite part too, dude. All right, number 7. What's the worst part of the hobby?
Well, having the community and friends. Having that being said, I'm going to say the worst part for me is the kind of how social media has, to a degree, it's opened up a lot of doors for people.
Right.
It's done great things for the hobby, but I think also it may have had some negative impacts too. And that leads me to the other part of that. So it's social media, and then I think that the fact that there's drama around the reptile community is kind of silly to me, man. And it makes me sad. It's like we all have this mutual love, And I don't think that, it's worthwhile for a bunch of grown-ups to be getting upset with each other over reptiles.
Amen on that, dude. All right, man. Number
That's
8.
the worst part.
Yeah, number 8. And you already kind of answered this one. What other species do you keep and why?
I've kept, a ton of stuff: chameleons, tegus, colubrids, retics, blackheads. I kept some Timors and Burmese. A ton of different stuff, monitors.
Yep.
But currently, I'm primarily keeping retics, boas, ball pythons, and then I do have a few colubrids.
Nice.
That I have as just primarily as pets, to be honest. But I'll probably be moving more into the dry marcon stuff. But I have an indigo, a male eastern indigo, and then I have a male musarana. I had a female mandarin rat snake that someone wanted, so I gifted that one to a friend. But yeah, just some oddball colubrids.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. And I love my easterns, dude. They are my cleanup crew when I have snakes that don't want to eat, and I have some leftover frozen thawed. They handle that pretty well, dude. I don't know
about you too, but they handle the leftover day-old chicks pretty well too.
Oh yeah, totally, dude. From falconry rice, yeah. No, these guys will. Especially, I have a fairly young eastern indigo male who's honestly like my only true pet snake that I have right now, right? And so his name is Steve, and Steve will eat everything and anything left over by my goshawk. Back when I was flying falcons, he would eat whatever pieces of leftover chicks that they didn't want to finish, because I had some real finicky falcons at the time. Yeah, man. Yeah. That's how they roll.
Shout out to Steve, man.
Yeah, that's right.
You gotta keep some stuff as a pet,
Well, yeah, totally.
What's the point if you don't enjoy keeping it?
Yeah, amen to that, dude. Only problem is I don't enjoy cleaning up after him because he craps like a king.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, those dry marcon are no joke, man. Their feeding response their response on both ends, the mouth coming out of the cage and the mess they leave behind.
Oh yeah. All right, man. Number 9. What's a common misconception about you?
I don't necessarily know if I have like a public persona enough to have a misconception, but I would say that I'm kind of like a closet breeder, but I would say that the people who I do know in the community, I am a pretty introverted person, and so I feel like maybe there's a misconception that maybe I'm less approachable, or I don't you can't reach out to me. But hey, if you want to reach out to me and talk falconry, talk snakes, I'm always open to that. So that's probably the closest I can come to that.
Nice, man. All right, number 10. What makes you say, "What was I thinking?" when you look back at your time in the hobby?
Oh man, lack of focus. I'm sure that's not the first time you
heard that. I'm with you, dude. We all got Pokemon syndrome, bro.
Oh, dude, yeah.
It's a real thing.
Badass of a boa collection I could have right now if I didn't keep everything and anything under the sun.
Right. Oh, man. All right, number 11. What's one tip you would give the people looking to invest in boas and in reptiles?
Okay. I think that I would say do your research, and if you're truly investing, treat this decision kind of with the same fiscal diligence you would any other investment decision. You want to know your markets. You want to know you have, what platforms you have to sell. You want to know the lineage of that animal. And I think the biggest thing is have vision and invest in what you love. That's my biggest investment tip, because we've all been guilty of chasing markets on morphs and stuff, but in the end, just do what you love. Yep.
Amen to that, dude. All right, brother. Number 12. Any shout-outs you want to throw out there?
Yeah, man. I would say I'll start by saying shout out to Vin Russo for literally writing the book on it. I don't know him personally, but his books have been paramount for me. Ace Boas has helped me a ton just through social media, reached out, and we've kept in contact, and he's been a super helpful resource. Shout out to Brian Abramson for founding Florida Redtails, making these badass animals that made me want to be part of this. Shout out to my buddy Mike Porter from the ball python world. He's a good dude.
Yep.
And then shout out to there's a gal local to me, Stephanie Sickler, and she has a really awesome both morph and locality boa collection. So shout out to her, man. She's making some really awesome stuff this season.
Awesome, man. Well, that wraps it up for today. Tony, tell the people out there where they can see your animals and learn more about you.
Yeah, so you can find best place would be social media. You can Facebook. You got Florida Redtails and SenCal Exotics. Instagram, we've got SenCal Exotics on there, and we'll have Florida Redtails soon. Those are probably your two best options. We do have a Morph Market page, but we are all sold out for the year. So come find us on social media and check out that Proving Growth Funky Tail.
Awesome. All right, guys, that wraps it up for today. Thanks for listening. We are out. Guys, that was a great episode. Thanks to Tony Panteleo of SenCal Exotics and Florida Redtails for joining us today. Join us on the next episode as we speak with Kenny Saito of Boa Affliction. We're going to talk about his work with the carbon gene. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Do us a favor. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. Until next time, grow 'em slow.